Dear children, do you know whenever there is light, someone follows you? Have you ever wondered who it is? Do you know who is that? It is your shadow. Have you played with your shadow? Yes? Have you played different shapes with your hand? Like dog, deer, with your fingers. Have you played in the shadow? Okay. So here we are going to study a poetry on my shadow. And this shadow is very, very like me, from the heels up to the head. Let's begin the poetry. It is written by the famous poet Robert Louis Stevenson. Now, first, let's see the picture of the poet who wrote. Robert Louis Stevenson. He is a famous poet. Robert Louis Stevenson, in full, Robert Louis Balfour Stevenson. He was born in 1850 in Edinburgh, Scotland, in the country Scotland. And he died on December 3rd, 1894. He is a Scottish essayist, poet, and author of fiction and travel books. His best known works are Treasure Island for children, Kidnapped, and the famous Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And the one more famous work is The Master of Ballantrae. So this is the picture of Robert Louis Stevenson, who is the author of who is the poet of My Shadow. Now let's watch the video.
My Shadow by R.L. Stevenson. I have a little shadow that goes in and out. My Shadow by R.L. Stevenson. I have a little shadow that goes in and out with me, and what can be the use of him is more than I can see. He is very, very like me from the heels up to the head, and I see him jump before me when I jump into my bed. The funniest thing about him is the way he likes to grow. Not at all like proper children, which is always very slow. For he sometimes shoots up taller like an India rubber ball. And he sometimes goes so little that there's none of him at all. He hasn't got any idea of how children ought to play, and can only make a fool of me in every sort of way. He stays so close behind me, he's a coward, you can see. I'd think shame to stick to Nursie as that shadow sticks to me. One morning very early, before the sun was up, I rose and found the shining dew on every buttercup. But my lazy little shadow, like an arrant sleepyhead, had stayed at home behind me and was fast asleep in bed.
So dear children, we have watched the video of My Shadow. So now let's see the summary of the poem. My Shadow is a poem written by Robert Louis Stevenson. The poem revolves around a child and his shadow. He is fascinated by his own shadow that moves with him. The child starts noticing things about his shadow. He notices that it resembles him. Resembles means it looks like him. Moreover, he also sees that the shadow does the same thing as the child. For For instance means for example, when he gets in bed, the shadow does the same as well. See, that means at this age also, even I also did in my childhood that I played with my shadow, right? When you move your hand in this way, the shadow also does the same. When you wave your hand, the shadow also wave the hands. When you dance, the shadow also dance, right? When you jump, the shadow also jumps, right? When you scratch your head, the shadow also scratch his head, right? So whatever you do, the shadow also do. So many children might have played with their shadows, right? So here the child also observed that the shadow also does the same thing as he does, same thing what he does. So sometimes it gets into bed before the child can. You know why it is said like that? Sometimes if sometimes it gets into bed before the child can. Before the child goes into the bed, the shadow gets inside. So please, you can even check to please check it today. When you go to your bedroom, right? When you go, say, watch your shadow. When you move forward, your shadow will be before you, right? Suppose if the bed is here, this side, the shadow, when you move from here, the shadow will be there. And before you get into the bed, when you move, the shadow will come to the side of the bed. Okay, that is what the child said. Sometimes it gets into bed before the child can. However, some things still confuses a child. It is that the shadow keeps changing its size. Have you observed the shadow during the noontime, during the evening? The shadow, the position will be changed, right? Please observe your shadow during the noontime, in morning, and also in the evening. See the changes it's in its direction and also its size. It is, just, it is that the shadow keeps changing its size. Sometimes it grows very tall and other times it turns small. Sometimes it goes very big, very tall, it goes to very tall. Sometimes the shadow it becomes very small. One day the child decides to get up early in the morning before the sunrise. Then he notices there are dews on the flowers, but the shadow is missing there. So he could not see his own shadow in the early morning. Thus he assume means he guessed that his shadow is so lazy that it is still sleeping in bed. This is the thinking of the child. The child guesses that the shadow is very lazy to get up early in the morning, and the shadow is still in the sleeping bed. It is sleeping in his bed. Now let's see the stanza-wise explanation of the poetry. Let's look at the first stanza. I have a little shadow that goes in and out with me, and what can be the use of him is more than I can see. He is very like me from the heels up to the head, and I see him jump before me when I jump into my bed. See, in this poetry, it is a very interesting observation of a child who sees his shadow and finds it very amusing. Sometimes he feels that his little shadow becomes shadow comes and also it goes out. Sometimes it becomes big, very tall. Sometimes it becomes very short and all, right? So when let me explain these lines of the first stanza. In these lines, the boy is telling us that he has a shadow which looks similar to him. It's similar. Your shadow is exactly like you only, right? You can look at the shadow, see your reflection is showing over there. So, whatever you do, right? When you lift your hand, lift your legs, it will also lift. When you move your hands, it will also move your hands, move its hands, right? So it's actually the reflection. The child is observing the reflection and its changes happens. The boy is telling us that he has a shadow which looks similar to him. He is telling us that shadow is also useful to us if we think its uses. He also tells us that he is very much similar from head to the heel, from top to bottom. Okay, from head to heel means from the top to the bottom part of the boy, and jumps into his bed before him. Now let's see the second stanza. The funniest thing about him is the way he likes to grow, not at all like proper children, which is always very slow, for he sometimes shoots up taller like an Indian rubber ball, and he sometimes gets so little that there is none of him at